A clerk of the Preobrazhensky office, posted at the western gate of the Moscow Kremlin in the cold spring of 1705, holds a copper token the size of a large coin in his palm. On one side, the double-headed eagle of the Russian state. On the other side, 4 words in Old Church Slavonic. Sborody dengi vzeti. Beard, money taken. The clerk's task is straightforward. Any man entering the city with a beard is required to surrender the appropriate fee. In exchange, he receives one of these tokens, which he must carry with him every time he steps into a town, on pain of having his beard publicly shaved by a state barber on the spot. The token has a tariff: 100 rubles per year for a first guild merchant, 60 for a second guild merchant, 30 for a townsman. 1 kopeck every time a peasant entered the city, paid at the gate. Adjusted for purchasing power, the highest rate equaled roughly half a year's wages for a skilled craftsman. A man could pay more for his face than he paid for his house. The Borodovoy znak itself is a small copper disc, 25 millimeters across, 3 millimeters thick, weighing about 10 grams. 2 principal series were minted, the first in 1699, the second in 1705, distinguishable by the lettering and the position of the eagle. Approximately 200 original specimens survive in museum collections worldwide, the largest holding in the State Historical Museum in Moscow, with smaller groupings in the Hermitage in St. Petersburg, the Ashmolean in Oxford, and the American Numismatic Society in New York. The reverse legend on most surviving examples reads, Sborody dengi vzeti. Beard, money taken, though some variants add the year and the place of issue. Numismatists call it the only coin in European history minted specifically to certify the right to keep part of one's own body. Today, the consensus is that hair is personal, a choice, an aesthetic. Modern men are told their facial hair expresses individuality: the trimmed beard of the startup founder, the stubble of the actor between roles, the clean-shaven jaw of the executive on the cover of a quarterly report. Newspaper-style sections write about beard renaissance in 2014 and the return of the clean shave in 2022, as if these were natural movements in personal taste, like hemlines or lapels. Read the official record only, and that is what facial hair looks like. Read a corporate handbook from any Fortune 500 company between 1950 and 1990. Clean shave required. Facial hair grounds for dismissal. Read the United States Marine Corps grooming regulations. Beards prohibited except for medical exemption. Read the dress code of every airline cabin crew between 1960 and the early 2000s. Read the staff manual of Walt Disney World, which forbade facial hair on cast members until 2012. IBM under Thomas Watson Jr. from 1950 until the late 1980s. Clean shave, white shirt, dark suit, mandatory. Apple under Steve Jobs, 1997 to 2006. No visible facial hair in the retail division. Coca-Cola until 2004, the same. McDonald's corporate grooming standard until 2017, the same. In the opposite direction, the Saudi religious police, the Mutaween, enforced the growth of a beard on adult Muslim men under the rules of the Committee for the Promotion of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice from 1940 until their effective dissolution in 2016. The Iranian Basij militia after 1979, similar pressure in the opposite direction. The line is drawn on the face. The institution decides where. Here is the first crack in that record. Open a photograph of the British cabinet of 1880 under William Gladstone. Every man in the room, every minister, every clerk, every cabinet secretary is bearded. Not stubbled, not trimmed, full beard, often reaching the upper chest. Open a photograph of the United States Senate of 1870. The same. The American Civil War generals, Grant, Lee, Sherman, Burnside, Hooker, Meade, all bearded. Lincoln, Marx, Darwin, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Whitman, Tennyson, Brahms, every face that defined 19th century Europe and America carried a full beard. This was not fashion. Fashion does not run uniformly across an entire generation of statesmen, scientists, novelists, and generals on 3 continents. Something else was running. What was running was the same thing that was running in 1705 at the Moscow Gate, in 334 BCE outside Alexander's tent in Asia Minor, in 117 at Hadrian's coronation, in 1511 when Pope Julius II decided to stop shaving. The face has never been a personal matter. The face has been a flag. And the line drawn on it, clean, full, trimmed, dyed, oiled, plated, has been an instrument of the state, of the church, of the army, of the guild, for as long as any of those institutions have kept written records. Open the alternative record. Greek men of the archaic period are bearded without exception. Bearded gods, bearded philosophers, bearded heroes on red figure pottery. A clean-shaven adult Greek man before the 5th century BCE is a foreigner, a slave, or a boy too young to grow facial hair. Spartan men, by the laws attributed to Lycurgus, were required to wear the beard long and to oil it before battle. A clean-shaven Spartan adult was a man under public censure, his face the sign of a punishment. In contrast, Egyptian priests of the same period shaved every visible hair on the body, head, beard, eyebrows, body, every 3rd day, on the doctrine that all body hair was unclean. The same continent, the same century, 2 opposite institutional rules carved on the male body. Between them, an Athenian merchant arriving in Memphis would have looked, to the Egyptian, like a barbarian, and the Egyptian would have looked, to him, like a corpse. Around the time of the Peloponnesian War, something shifts in the Athenian elite. By the time of Plato, shaving is becoming acceptable among the young. By the time of Alexander, it has become, by royal decree, mandatory. Plutarch records the moment. Before the Battle of Issus in 333 BCE, Alexander orders the Macedonian troops to shave their beards. Plutarch's stated reason: a beard is a handle. In close combat, an enemy can grasp it and pull the head down to expose the throat. The military explanation is real. Macedonian phalanx warfare put men literally face to face. 16-foot pikes locked, the front ranks within arm's length of the front ranks of the Persian infantry. A handful of beard, a knife, 2 seconds. The shave was tactical. It was also incomplete. Alexander is 23 years old, has just inherited his father's army, and is consciously distinguishing his force from the bearded Persian armies they are about to engage. The shaving order is a uniform. It is also a declaration. We are not them. From that moment, the clean-shaven jaw becomes the visual signature of the Hellenistic and then the Roman officer class. Julius Caesar shaves, Augustus shaves, Vespasian shaves. The denarius coinage of the early empire shows a clean line of imperial faces, beardless, for 170 years. This part is off the record. Read the standard textbook account, and the Roman shift to shaving is described as a fashion that spread from the elite outward. The fuller version is that shaving in Rome was tied to citizenship, to military service, and ultimately to the right to vote in the comitia. A Roman boy's first shave, the depositio barbae, was a public religious ceremony. The trimmings dedicated to the household gods. The face you presented to the city was the face the city had approved. When Hadrian became emperor in 117 and grew the first imperial beard in nearly 2 centuries, visible on every coin minted after that date, it was not because he had run out of razors. It was a political statement. The empire was now Hellenic, philosophical, Greek-leaning, no longer the bare-faced military republic of the First Dynasty. The imperial beard becomes mandatory among the educated class. It lasts for 200 years. Constantine, in 312, returns to clean shave. Christ in early Christian iconography is initially beardless. By the 5th century, after the official adoption of Christianity, the bearded Christ becomes canonical, and the beard becomes the visible sign of holiness in Eastern Christianity for the next 1,000 years. Byzantium keeps the beard. Russia, taking its faith from Byzantium in 988, keeps the beard. By the 17th century, an Orthodox Russian without a beard is, by the explicit teaching of the Church, an unmade man, a heretic, a Latinate corrupter. The Stoglav Council of 1551 rules that shaving is a Latin innovation, forbidden to Orthodox men under threat of exclusion from communion. The face confirms the faith. The faith confirms the throne. The throne confirms the law. Then the law changes. In 1511, Pope Julius II grows a beard during an illness and continues to wear it after recovery. He is the first pope in nearly 500 years to wear facial hair. Catholic clergy follow within 2 generations. By the late 16th century, the beard has become the standard sign of a Catholic bishop. The Reformation reacts. The clean shave becomes a marker of the Calvinist and the Anabaptist. England in 1535, under Henry VIII, experiments with a tax on beards over 2 weeks' growth. The policy lapses within a generation. The continent does not give up so easily. Russia, 25th of August, 1698. Tsar Peter, 26 years old, returns to Moscow after 18 months in Western Europe, Amsterdam, London, Vienna, Königsberg. At Preobrazhensky, the royal estate outside the city, the boyars come to greet him. Peter draws a pair of barber's shears from his coat, personally cuts the beard of boyar Alexei Sheen, his senior general. Then the beard of Prince Fyodor Romodanovsky. Then the beards of every senior boyar present. Eyewitness accounts come from the Austrian envoy Johann Korb, secretary to the Habsburg embassy, who recorded the scene in his diary the same week. Korb writes that the floor of the hall was covered with the cut beards by the end of the morning, that some of the boyars wept openly, that one, unnamed in the diary, collected his own beard from the floor and carried it home to be buried. in the belief that on the day of resurrection he would have to present every part of his body to God and would be unable to do so if the beard were missing. The next morning, the imperial decree begins drafting. By winter, the formal order is in effect: shave or pay. The fee is graduated by class. The token, the copper Borodovoy's knock, is introduced as the receipt. The Old Believers, the conservative wing of Russian Orthodoxy who had already broken with the official church in the schism of 1666, are exempted from the shave, but not from the tax. They pay. They keep their beards. They wear the token around their necks like a slow execution warrant. The decree did not stop at men. In the same legislative cycle, Peter abolished the terem, women's quarters of the Muscovite boyar household, where noble women had lived in seclusion behind locked doors for 2 centuries. By the early 1700s, noble women were required to attend the new court assemblies, the Assemblea, uncovered in European dress, faces visible, hair powdered in the French style. The decree on facial hair and the decree on the women's quarters were 2 sides of the same operation. The face of the Russian elite, male and female, was being rebuilt to look Western, and the rebuilding was administrative, not voluntary. Stop the clock for a moment. Yakov Vasilyevich Buturlin, 51 years old, of the lesser branch of an old Muscovite boyar family, steps out of a wooden bathhouse in his city compound on the morning of the 4th of March, 1705. The thaw has begun. The Moskva is moving under the ice. His skin is red from the steam. A house serf wraps him in a heavy linen sheet and hands him a cup of hot kvass. As Yakov drinks, his nephew, Nikifor, who has just returned from the Preobrazhensky office on a separate errand, speaks quietly to him in the doorway of the bath. The decree has been formalized. The tariff is now public. Yakov, as a townsman of his rank, will owe 60 rubles a year. Yakov sets the kvass down. He looks once at his own beard, gray, reaching the middle of his chest. The beard his father wore and his grandfather wore, and every man named Buturlin had worn since the family was first written into the boyar register in the reign of Ivan III. He pays. The token, 2 weeks later, is delivered to his house by a clerk. He wears it inside the breast of his kaftan for the next 11 years. That day, his face stopped being his. The face Yakov had washed every morning since the age of 15 now required a yearly receipt to continue existing in the form it had always taken. He paid for it. The Tsar received the money. The Empire registered the transaction. The clerk's tally in Moscow recorded it as fiscal income against the campaign expenses of the Great Northern War. The beard, in 1705, became taxable matter. The face became state property, leased back to its owner annually. The number nobody recorded in a single column is the price of the entire program. In the first decade of the beard tax, the imperial treasury collected approximately 840,000 rubles. Adjusted for the cost of skilled labor at the time, that is roughly equivalent to building and outfitting 2 full ships of the line for the new Russian Baltic fleet. Peter's navy, in real terms, was paid for in part by Russian beard. The empire that defeated Sweden at Poltava in 1709 was financed, line item by line item, by the faces of men who would have preferred to remain medieval. The Streltsy paid first. In the autumn of 1698, elite musketeer regiments of the old Muscovite army rose against Peter in his absence. They were defeated.
crossing is tomorrow at dawn.
1,182 Streltsy were executed by the end of October, many of them personally hanged or beheaded by Peter and his closest officers in the courtyards of Preobrazhenskoye and the Red Square. Their corpses were left on display through the winter as a warning. The Streltsy as a military institution were dissolved. With them went the visual culture of bearded Russian soldiers. The new Russian regular army, modeled on Swedish and Dutch lines, was beardless from the founding. The old believers paid second. The schism in the Russian church had begun decades earlier. Patriarch Nikon's liturgical reforms of 1666 had split the church, and the Solovetsky monastery on the White Sea had held out for 8 years, from 1668 to 1676. An armed siege against the troops of Tsar Alexei, before being taken by treachery and its monks executed. Protopop Avakum, the leader of the dissenting faction, was burned at Pustozyorsk in 1682 for refusing the new rites. By the time of Peter's beard decree, the old believer communities were already a population accustomed to dying for the unchanged face of their faith, including, literally, the face. The northern VYG community in Karelia, founded in 1694 by the brothers Andrey and Semyon Denisov as a refuge for old believers, became the largest such settlement in the empire. Its bearded elders organized self-immolations as a theological response to enforced shaving and other reforms. In the years immediately after the beard decree, mass self-immolations spread across the north. At the Paleostrelsky Monastery on Lake Onega in 1693, approximately 2,700 old believers locked themselves inside the wooden church and set it on fire, rather than submit to the new church and the new state. At Podose in 1694, another mass burning. At Tara in 1722, a siege ended in fire. Smaller events through the Karelian forests, the Vologda lakes, the Pomor coast. By contemporary estimates, between 8,000 and 20,000 old believers died by self-immolation in the first 2 decades after the schism, with a clear acceleration after the beard decree formalized. Officials counted bodies. The state recorded the empty parishes. The question of whether a man's beard belonged to him or to the Tsar was answered by some thousands of men and women with fire. The boyars paid third, and quietly. Old families lost their court positions. The new administrative ranks Peter introduced in the Table of Ranks of 1722 were filled by men who shaved without complaint. The bearded boyar disappeared from official portraiture by the 1730s. Men who remained bearded paid the annual tax and lived out their lives as fiscal anomalies, marked by the token they carried in their pocket, until the tax was finally abolished by Catherine II in 1772, 74 years after Peter first lifted the shears at Preobrazhenskoye. Name them. 8 Russians named in the church and court records of the period, who paid in one form or another. Patriarch Adrian, last patriarch of the unreformed Russian Orthodox Church, who refused to shave and died in 1700. Boyar Alexei Semyonovich Shine, the first man Peter cut. Prince Fyodor Romodanovsky, who shaved and was promoted. Boyar Tikhon Streshnev, who shaved and survived. Boyar Yakov Buturlin, who paid and kept. Andrey Denisov, leader of the Vaig community of old believers in the far north, who refused. Semyon Denisov, his brother, who who refused. Boyarinya Feodosia Morozova, who had died for the same conservative faith 30 years earlier in 1675. Her death in a pit in the ground at Barovsk, foreshadowing what would come. Each of them met the same question. Each answered it differently. The Patriarch refused and died of natural causes before the full weight of the decree fell. A boyar shaved and kept his rank. A boyar paid and kept his beard and his rank, but lost his standing at court. An old believer locked himself in a wooden church with his community and burned. There was no neutral position. The face was the position. Today, the same thing, mechanically. On 25th of November 1925, the Turkish parliament, under Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, passes the hat law, Şapka Kanunu, prohibiting the fez and requiring Western-style hats. Within months, the same administration is exerting pressure on bearded religious figures to shave or face exclusion from civil life. In Iran in 1936, Reza Shah orders the forced unveiling of women, kashfe hijab, and parallel pressure on Shia clergy regarding facial hair. In 1946, the Albanian communist regime under Enver Hoxha imposes a clean-shave norm on government workers. Bearded men are routinely denied positions. The pattern is unmistakable. Modernizing regimes on 3 continents in 3 different decades draw their first line on the face. In the United States, the line is drawn by employers rather than by parliaments, but it is drawn. IBM between 1950 and 1990 requires clean shave and white shirt. The U.S. military maintains its facial hair prohibition to the present. Police departments in major American cities maintain similar codes, with sporadic litigation under religious exemption laws. The most recent significant case being a Sikh officer in the New York Police Department in 2016. The token has been replaced by the personnel file. The clerk has been replaced by HR. The decision about whose face is acceptable in the room is still made by an institution and is still enforced by the implicit threat of unemployment. Yakov Buturlin sat in his bathhouse on the 4th of March, 1705, and looked at his own beard for the last time as something that belonged to him. He paid. He kept it. He died 11 years later in his sleep, with the token still inside his caftan pocket. The token survives in a small glass case at the State Historical Museum in Moscow, alongside several hundred others, all stamped with the same 4 words: Zborody, Dengi, Vzyati. Beard money taken. The clerk at the western gate of the Kremlin closed the office at sunset and went home to a wife who shaved his cheeks every Sunday with a straight razor she kept wrapped in oilcloth. He did not pay the tax. His face was already free. The state had decided what free looked like, and his face was the right shape. 2,000 years between Alexander outside Issus and the clerk at the Kremlin gate, and the principle has not moved. A face is a record. A record requires a recorder. The recorder is whichever institution can enforce the line in the morning you wake up. The line today is somewhere on your jaw. Who put it there? When? In exchange for what? And what would have been on your face? Exactly which line, exactly where? If you had been born in the wrong century, in the wrong empire, in the wrong room.